Namaskar and welcome to Diplomatic Dispatch. I am your host, Vikas Swarup. The 26th Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting took place from June 20 to 25 in Kigali, Rwanda, having been postponed twice since June 2020 because of the COVID-19 pandemic. External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar led the Indian delegation. So in this, our 40th episode, we will examine the role of the Commonwealth and India's unique relationship with it. The early Commonwealth was born from Imperial Britain's attempt to maintain control over its colonies despite their growing cries for independence. After the First World War, rising nationalism in the Dominions led Britain to concede in 1926 that they would be equal in status. That declaration, formalized in 1931, marked the founding of the British Commonwealth of Nations. The modern Commonwealth was formed on 26 April 1949, following the London Declaration, according to which it would be a free association of its independent member states. When India was invited to join the Commonwealth in 1949, Prime Minister Nehru agreed with a pivotal caveat. India would join the Commonwealth as a republic without the requirement that it had to swear allegiance to the British Crown. In other words, India would accept the king as an individual, not the Crown, and the British sovereign as the head of the Commonwealth only as a symbol of the free association of its independent member nations. This proposal was accepted, and later that year, India, Pakistan and Ceylon, as Sri Lanka was then known, joined Britain, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa and Canada as members of the Commonwealth. Over the years, the membership of the Commonwealth has grown exponentially, from 8 when Queen Elizabeth came to the throne to the present tally of 56, including a few who were never British colonies. Gabon and Togo are the most recent examples, part of a trend of French-speaking African states seeking new alliances beyond Paris's old networks of influence. Today, the Commonwealth extends from the Americas to Africa, Europe, Asia, and the Pacific. A voluntary association of 56 independent and equal countries, it is home to 2.5 billion people, one-third of the world's population, and had a combined GDP of $13.1 trillion in 2021. What makes it unique is that it has as its members both advanced economies and developing countries. It also includes several island nations that are among the smallest countries in the world. In fact, 32 members out of the 56 Commonwealth countries are classified as small states or small island developing states. The Commonwealth is often described as a family of nations, and as a mark of their special relationship, members call their diplomatic missions in other Commonwealth states high commissions rather than embassies. The Charter of the Commonwealth describes the organization as a voluntary association of independent and sovereign states, each responsible for its own policies, consulting and cooperating in the common interests of our peoples in the promotion of international understanding and world peace, and influencing international society to the benefit of all through the pursuit of common principles and values. These common values are democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. The Commonwealth Ministerial Action Group, CMAG, established in 1995, is the custodian of these fundamental political values. It assesses violations of Commonwealth values and recommends measures to restore democracy and constitutional rule, including suspension and even expulsion from the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth also has a chair in office, which is the member of the Commonwealth that hosts the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting. The President of Rwanda, His Excellency Paul Kagame, is the current chair in office, who assumed the chairmanship during CHOGM 2022. India is the largest member state of the Commonwealth, being home to nearly 60% of its total population. India is also one of the largest contributors to the Commonwealth regular budget, based on the capacity to pay formula, besides providing the largest number of technical experts after the UK under the Commonwealth Fund for Technical Cooperation, CFTC, the main funding window for assistance programs to Commonwealth members. To learn more about the Commonwealth and India's approach to it, I am joined by two superb experts. In a career spanning 38 years, Ambassador Ruchi Ghanshyam served as India's High Commissioner to Ghana, South Africa and the United Kingdom, and as Secretary West in the Ministry of External Affairs. She dealt with the Commonwealth in her capacity as Secretary West and as High Commissioner to the UK, and also served on the Executive Committee of the Commonwealth's Board of Governors. Mr. Deepanjan Chaudhury is diplomatic editor at the Economic Times. He has been covering foreign affairs for over 2 decades. Let me start with you, Deepanjan. Some say the Commonwealth is a relic of the past, a symbol of British colonialism. Why did India join the Commonwealth in 1949? And how did India's joining it transform the organization?
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Swarup, for inviting me here. When we joined Commonwealth, India joined Commonwealth in 1940, the late 1940s, there were a lot of opposition from within, and particularly because we were coming out of 190 years of colonialism, and that too of British colonialism. But Prime Minister Nehru thought it would be a correct approach to open a window to the West, and Commonwealth was a right organization. And we were with the British as a part of the British Dominion for almost 190 years. So an automatic divorce was not possible at this stage, and it took some years. And some thought that it will be, with his demise, probably we would not continue in Commonwealth. But we did continue, and we also hosted in the 1980s when his daughter was the Prime Minister of India. We also hosted the Commonwealth Head of the States meeting. It also gave India an opportunity in a particular grouping where, besides UK and Canada and Australia, India is the largest country. There is no other P5 members, besides UK in this. So that's a big advantage for India to continue and therefore to shape, and also particularly in the development narrative, and also to a large extent political narrative. There are certain geopolitical issues where India finds a challenge from certain other P5 countries to deal with, and probably Commonwealth doesn't have those challenges here. Of course, there are some, because Pakistan is also a member, and there are certain bilateral challenges which might come. But even unlike SAARC, Commonwealth has not been used for settle bilateral dispute, at least in the context of South Asia. So it continues to be a useful platform, and going forward, given India's global aspirations, we would like to have Commonwealth, shape Commonwealth as a South-South cooperation model, and a development model, as probably an alternative model. Yeah.
Ambassador Ghanshyam, now detractors tend to dismiss the Commonwealth as a talk shop. But there are some concrete successes that the Commonwealth has had. Can you take our viewers through some of them?
First of all, thank you, Ambassador Swarup, for inviting me to your prestigious program. It's a pleasure to be here today. The Commonwealth is often dismissed by people as being simply a talk shop, but it has played an important role, for instance, in the dismantling of the apartheid regime in South Africa. Between the 60s and the 90s, once India had joined, and also the newly independent countries in Africa and Asia joined the Commonwealth, there was enormous pressure that was built up against the system of apartheid that was being followed in South Africa. So this pressure was successful in making South Africa withdraw its application to become a member of the Commonwealth. And then also there was a program of sanctions was prepared, which though Britain was not fully on board with, and it was always Britain was always a little bit on the different side from the rest of the Commonwealth countries, but the pressure from the Commonwealth countries itself was played an important role in dismantling the system of apartheid. The Commonwealth Fund for Technical Cooperation also has some successes, especially in the area of women's rights and other areas that Commonwealth is proud of and talks about. But perhaps the most important contribution has been in the arena of dismantling apartheid in South Africa.
Now, we heard from Deepanjan the value that India brings to the Commonwealth. What is the value of the Commonwealth for India?
It's a group where India can engage with a number of countries at a level at which India is comfortable. As Deepanjan mentioned, there are no other P5 countries other than UK. For instance, China or other, US, Russia, none of them are there. The value system that governs is comfortable. Now, all members are English speaking. They follow a similar kind of legal system. So it is a format in which India can be very comfortably engaged with other countries. More importantly, as you mentioned, 32 of the 42 small states of the world are members of the Commonwealth. Most of them do not have embassies in most parts of the world, and definitely not in India. And India doesn't have even embassies in all of those countries. Many of them, actually most of them are covered by concurrent accreditations by larger missions in larger countries. So this becomes a very important platform where India can, at a pace of its own choosing, at a comfort level, engage with much of these, much of the smaller states of the world. Also, trade can be an important factor because India has just in the recent past signed an FTA with Australia and is now talking to the UK for another FTA.
Now, Deepanjan, the CHOGM in Rwanda was the first Commonwealth Heads of Government Summit in the last 4 years because of the pandemic. Absolutely. Can you take our viewers through its main outcomes?
Yeah. It was very important that, the CHOGM was not only held after 4 years, we could do it in person, but it was also held in one of the new members of Commonwealth, which is not technically an English-speaking country, part of the Belgium and the Francophone world. But Rwanda under President Paul Kagame has achieved considerable success in Eastern Africa, and therefore it was also for him to showcase that success to the larger part of the democratic and English-speaking world. I think they touched on important issues of the day, and one, of course, was how to fight this COVID and come out of the COVID. And many of these states were badly impacted, and they did not have the means to fight this in terms of the economic wherewithal. I understand there was also focus on energy security and the food security, which India also emphasized. They discussed in detail the fallout of the Ukraine conflict and how to deal with some of these issues. There were a lot of focus on gender equality, focus on in terms of development initiatives and how to build a model which is not in debt. I mean, many of these countries were already in debt and further pushed into debt due to the COVID situation. Even this is a model which is more of a win-win of a different kind, and I don't want to get into the details here of the other win-win model, but a model which was win-win, which takes the locals' requirements and considerations into fact and build on some of the, I mean, all these countries and particularly in Africa has been impacted, particularly with the food crisis, and some of them are not members of the Commonwealth, but are joining these Commonwealth states, and how the Commonwealth can join, and India had certain suggestions, and in terms of the suggestions was also carried forward in G7 within 2 days by Prime Minister, how Indian agriculture can come to the help of certain countries, and India has always been benevolent in helping these countries to strengthen food security, gender equality, institutions of democracy. And I think as as UK, which sort of, I mean, tries to reinvent itself in a postmodern world, and India becomes the most important, probably the player in the Commonwealth, because Canada and Australia, I mean, are still, I mean, they are important and they are economically quite powerful countries, but their appeal in Commonwealth is not as much appeal that India holds.
Now, the summit in Kigali included comments by Prince Charles expressing sorrow for his country's role in the transatlantic slave trade. Right. The first time the Commonwealth has publicly addressed the subject. Some members urged the organization to go further by discussing reparations to countries hurt by the slave trade. What is your view on this?
I think it's a very emotive subject to begin with. It's been this slave trade continued for hundreds of years, and even from India, indentured laborers were taken to various parts of the world who are now members of the Commonwealth, be it in the Pacific or Indian Ocean or in the Atlantic. One summit was not enough to address all these issues. These need proper evaluation, study. It's definitely very important, and many feel this. Even in the US and elsewhere, there is a strong sense of injustice which has happened hundreds of years back. But I mean, some of them have come out of it. But it needs a deeper study, I believe. Maybe Commonwealth can launch a commission. I mean, because he has given a suggestion, maybe a Commonwealth can launch a commission to see all this. And whether a Truth and Reconciliation Commission like South Africa can be established, I don't know whether, because both of you have served in South Africa and you know this. I mean, how is that possible? But maybe to study with a study group or assessment body that can be formed to look into this.
Ambassador Ghanshyam, you served in the UK. You want to add to this?
I think he's made some very interesting points. I think ramifications of what we are talking about are far too big to just be casually discussed.
I agree, because this was the British Empire where the sun never set.
The sun never set, and also more than one country was actually involved in the transatlantic slave trade. So it is something that would require really enormous amount of thought and study to be able to say anything. I think the implications and the repercussions of what we are talking need to be understood first before we can even go to the question.
Now, Ambassador Ghanshyam, one of India's top priorities within the Commonwealth, as you said, is assisting small states and small island developing countries. How has India concretized this assistance?
India has always been committed to the small island developing states and also least developed states and landlocked countries. There are many things that India has done over the years, not just in the Commonwealth but in other multilateral fora as well. But in the Commonwealth, specifically, for instance, in 2018, when Prime Minister Modi led the Indian delegation and to the London summit in 2018, there were some very interesting announcements that he made. So, for instance, the contribution that India makes to the Commonwealth Fund for Technical Cooperation was doubled. Similarly, the support that India gives to the Commonwealth Small Office program in New York and Geneva, that was more than doubled. But I think the most important announcement that he made in this context was the opening of a sub-window in the India UN Development Fund. Another very important announcement which he made, and that is a program, a capacity building program that was organized by the National Institute of Hydrology in Goa. This is very significant because majority of the Commonwealth states are either island states, small island developing states, or they are coastal countries. So they are all concerned about climate change and the erosion of coastlines. All of these are issues of great importance as the world faces a growing climate change impact.
Deepanjan, you mentioned trade. Now, what can be done to boost intra-Commonwealth trade and investment?
The Commonwealth countries are not well connected in terms of pure physical connectivity. I'm talking about, India is today connected with Australia, Canada. We have, bilaterally we have done a trade pact with Australia, and we are negotiating one with Canada. Hopefully that will also come through. But if you look at some of the other Commonwealth countries, including in Indian Ocean region, Mauritius has been, of course, a gateway for India, and we have a trade pact with Mauritius to get into the African market. But many of the African countries, because of various reasons, because of the connectivity, because of the lack of knowledge of the strength of these countries, in my opinion, the Commonwealth can look into probably something, because bulk of these countries also come from Africa and the Caribbean, right? Now, they can look into because an arrangement with the trade pact of the Caribbean, and Africa has a free trade agreement. So why don't the African states and the states in the Caribbean come together, bring their achievements under these two free trade agreement or trading arrangements, and then link it with the 4 big countries of the Commonwealth, which is Canada, UK, India and Australia. These are big trading nations, and therefore...
So something like the RCEP model?
Something like RCEP model, which is for the Commonwealth, and which will really develop, because Pacifics do not have that kind of, and there is a certain interest in the Pacific China is looking into a trade pact with the Pacific, and probably would slowly incrementally go towards that. But Africa has a model, Latin America has a model of which Caribbean is a part, right? And there are 4 big economies in the so why and many of these countries in Africa today, like Mr. Ghanshyam has served in Ghana and South Africa, are big economies. Nigeria is an important economy. Rwanda is coming up well. African economies are slowly coming of age, and there is a free trade agreement that they have. Mauritius, Seychelles also have good economic base. So there is a lot of scope. They need to probably have a kind of a model to begin with by connecting with the African Free Trade Agreement and the Caribbean trade arrangement, in my opinion.
Ambassador Ghanshyam, how do you see the future of the Commonwealth? What are the challenges it faces, And does it really need to reinvent itself?
That's a very pertinent question because one of the, I think at the start of this discussion, the very question that you started with, I think that points to the big perception challenge which the Commonwealth faces, and that is it just a talk shop or does it actually achieve something? So I think the question of perception of Commonwealth as an organization that brings value to the table, and resources, because Commonwealth has at its disposal very limited resources, and the requirement of the member states is of course much larger than what can ever be brought to the table. So these are big challenges which the Commonwealth faces. The desire of countries from outside the English-speaking Anglophone world is to join the organization. So there is something of value that this organization brings, that countries that were not part of this original membership category are wanting to become members. Should it try to reinvent itself or not? I think if Commonwealth has to remain relevant, considering that it already has a perception challenge and resource limitations, and the challenges that the world faces today, especially members of the Commonwealth, are going to be evolving so rapidly that Commonwealth must find a way to reinvent itself to be able to help members to face those challenges. As climate change brings more pandemics to our doorsteps, economies struggle even more. Commonwealth will have to be innovative and find out of the box ways to bring its members some succor. The role of India in this regard is very important, and if Commonwealth has to change its perception of being a relic of the past and wants to look towards the future, there must be greater role for India. There must be some representation of the Commonwealth, some establishment in India, so that the flag of Commonwealth is truly said to be flying in the developing world.
Tell us now, what are the soft power aspects of the Commonwealth that foster goodwill and promote friendships?
I think English language is a very important, and therefore some of the cultural commonalities of all these nations together. Then there are that also brings the food habits together with the things, and particularly this is something which, because many of the Commonwealth countries also has Indian diaspora, right? I mean, be it in Australia, or be it in Fiji, be it in New Zealand, be it in South Africa, Canada, and in the Caribbean, as well as in Uganda, Tanzania, Kenya, all these countries. I mean, so that is a big, Indian soft power. And I'm talking about, because the show hosted in India, there's a big Indian soft power element in the Commonwealth, besides the common heritage, common language, love for cricket. I mean, and of course, probably in some parts of the world, Bollywood is also, and Indian movies are also probably famous. And the other is the literature, I believe. You know, in terms of, there are many important authors, including you, which the Commonwealth countries have produced, I mean, in English, and read by all of them without being translated. That's most important.
Well, thank you, Deepanjan and Ambassador Ghanshyam, for taking our viewers through the many facets of the modern Commonwealth and how India's relationship with it has evolved over the last 7 decades. At a time when India's global interests are expanding, it must make greater use of the Commonwealth as a multilateral platform for the promotion of democracy, education and trade, where India is perfectly positioned to act as a bridge between the developed and the developing world. It should also step up its advocacy of and support to the Commonwealth's smaller and more vulnerable states. That is all I have for you in this edition of Diplomatic Dispatch. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.